Arun Jaitley, I should take it before. There was nowhere any suggestion yet you pass every bill. I know you are very concerned with the Karamcharis, whether Safai or otherwise. So your sentiments have been taken care of. Now we'll take, if the House agrees, after Mr. Jaitley's bill, we'll take that. That is the only thing. The Indian Succession Amendment Bill 2001, Shri Arun Jaitley. Agreed.
But now I beg to move that the bill to amend the Indian Succession Act 1925 be taken into consideration by this Honourable House. Madam, the Indian Succession Act 1925 was aimed at consolidating the law relating to testamentary and intestate succession as was prevalent at that time in our country. Chapter 2 of Part 5 of this Act deals with intestate succession of Christians. There are two particular provisions which this bill seeks to amend. Section 32 recognizes the Christian widow as one of the successors to succeed the property of her deceased husband. However, there is an explanation attached to it, and the effect of the explanation is, if at the time of the marriage there is an agreement between the wife and the husband, in that event the wife on becoming a widow will be excluded from her husband's succession. This, madam, was originally conceived to be something which would have been opposed to public policy, but because there was a specific statutory provision in 1925, this has been sustained. We have been receiving various demands that this should be done away from the statute book, and such a provision should have no recognition of this, particularly in the present age. The Kerala Women's Commission, several other non-governmental organizations, and various Christian organizations have been representing to the government that this provision should be, this explanation should be deleted, and a Christian widow should be entitled to succeed to the property of a husband, particularly if he dies intestate. The second provision is with regard to the provisions of Section 213 of the Indian Succession Act. This is intended to bring the Christians at par with other communities in the country. The provisions of Section 213 require, it is a provision which doesn't apply to the Muslims. It also doesn't apply to Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, except a certain category who live in certain three of the metropolitan towns. Since there has been no demand as yet in relation to that category of the Hindus, we are not looking at those amendments at the moment. But with regard to Christians, an exception has been carved out that upon the death of a Christian, there is a probate mandatorily required by his successors all over the country. This is a long drawn-out process where a Christian heirs have to go to court, spend money on litigation, and then get an order of court to enable them to succeed to their predecessors' interest. Some months ago, I had received a representation which was signed by Christian members of parliament belonging to both houses, about 23 of them, wanting the change in this particular provision. I thereafter consulted various other organizations of the Christians. They were also in favor of this change. The Law Commission, in its 110th report, the Christian Women's Commission, members of parliament, other community leaders have all been requesting us to make a change to this provision, and therefore there is a second amendment which has been introduced, which is to bring Indian Christians at par with the words Mohammedans used in Section 213, so that they are also not expected to go through this cumbersome legal process before succeeding the property of their predecessor in interest. Since this is a provision which seeks to help the community and also delete one provision which is now considered unconscionable with regard to excluding widows from inheritance of a husband's property, I request the Honourable House to take it up for consideration and passage today.
Now, I have one objection to it. It's as the bill is of 1925 and we were under a foreign rule, the word Mohammedan was used. Now, no more this word is
introduced, which is to bring Indian Christians at par with the words Mohammedans used in Section 213, so that they are also not expected to go through this cumbersome legal process before succeeding the property of their predecessor in interest. Since this is a provision which seeks to help the community and also delete one provision which is now considered unconscionable with regard to excluding widows from inheritance of a husband's property, I request the Honourable House to take it up for consideration and passage today.
Now, I have one objection to it. It's as the bill is of 1925 and we were under a foreign rule, the word Mohammedan was used. Now, no more this word is used in our country. We are, the Muslims are known as Muslim, non-Mohammedan. So you should delete this word and change it to Muslims, because there are no Mohammedans.
I will, since this is a pre-independence legislation, I'll check up whether this is used in other legislations also which are pre-independence, and we'll see what can be done.
Because all those discriminatory words which the British was using as far as women are concerned have been, and this word which they used as Mohammedans should be not used anymore. So I would request the Honorable Law Minister to guarantee, because we are Muslims and not Mohammedans.
Madam, I'll certainly check it up, because this would be used in certain other pre-1947 legislations. Wherever it's used, I'll examine that.
Now, I don't think there any dispute is about this bill. इसमें सब एग्री कर रहे हैं. अभी मेरे पास 3 ही नाम है, 4 नाम है, 5 नाम है. अभी if everybody agrees, हाँ? किसका?
Passes. Even Mabel is saying for unanimous passage.
If everybody so agrees, and it is beneficial to women.
No, madam, the point is
Yes.
that I think we had agreed the other day in the conference that legislation is the primary function of the House. Therefore, if anybody has any point to be made, I mean, of course, there will not be a very long discussion on this, but I think whosoever has given the names, let them speak and we will go through the matter.
I agree with you 100% that any legislation or every legislation should be discussed. As far as this legislation is concerned, this is beneficiary to women. They were discriminated after inheritance. I can only put one question to anybody else can put many questions, but I want to ask one thing. How, as far as the Muslim is concerned, the inheritance of the wife, the deceased wife, is properly identified, codified. But what about the Christian? How much a widow of a Christian will inherit?
Madam, I'm sorry.
Sorry if I put you into difficulty.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't follow what.
You know what happens, as far as the Muslims are concerned, their succession is identified according to Quran. That a woman is an inheritor, the children are residuaries. But as far as the Christian woman is concerned, how much share she's going to get from the husband? And how it will be divided?
There is a somewhat difficulty as far as that question is concerned, because there are some provisions which are still remaining under this Act, where there is, according to certain Christian organizations, there is some element of discrimination. And they have just represented to me, but because I have not been able to have, the normal practice of the government is that whenever we receive representations with regard to personal laws, we have larger consultations with community leaders and others, and it's only after we've discussed with them we bring the amendment. In fact, today I have received an amendment that there are certain categories of inheritance with regard to Christian women. There is still an element of discrimination, which I'll be separately looking into.
Then how will you deal with it once we pass this bill?
So this deals with the 2 separate categories. If necessary, these are all laws on which where all amendments need not be brought about on the same day. For instance, these are laws. The principal purpose of this amendment is to remove this onerous procedure of probate being mandatory for all Christians anywhere in the country before succession can be made, before they become entitled to succession. Now, this is not true of any other community. It is not true of Muslims at all. They don't require it. With regard to Hindus, it is required in the presidency towns of Mumbai, Chennai and Kolkata. It's not required elsewhere. As I mentioned in the opening statement that I'll be discussing with them also whether, because so far no demands have been made of us to delete it with regard to Hindus on those 3 cities. Hindus elsewhere in the country don't require it. But the Christians have been making a very forceful plea that why should we be subjected to this discrimination, and this should be deleted. So the principal purpose of this amendment is that. The second object is that otherwise a contract entered at the time of marriage, and I tried to find out what was the history, why was this provision brought in 1925, that at the time of marriage where wife and husband should be very fond of each other, they could enter into a contract to render the wife to destitution at a time when she becomes a widow, disentitle her from inheritance. This was really done with regard to for the protection of those cases where Englishmen would come to this country, and there were a large number of them before independence, marry women, but make sure that they are not entitled to inheritance of their British properties. So this provision was brought for that purpose, and today it is no longer required, so we are deleting it. There are some other provisions which are still areas of a problem, and I have in fact in my hand a representation I have received today itself, that they want those provisions also to be removed. For instance, when a son dies, the father becomes entitled to it, the mother is not entitled to inheritance. There are some provisions which are still discriminatory, and therefore Christian women's organizations have been writing to us. I'd be separately discussing with the community leaders before I bring about those.
Among the Muslim, the mother also get the same proportionate share.
So, for instance, this is the representation, we'll be independently looking into it.
Now I think if everybody wants to say a word, I have got your name, then let me go properly.
Madam, you asked a question with regard to the widow. Normally, the provision in this act with regard to Christians is 33. It's 1/3 for the widow and 2/3 for the other lineal descendants. Two-third for the others.
No, 1/3 for the widow. And the inheritors, who the children,
Under the Christian law, all women are prejudicially discriminated against, and it requires, I know, help from Goa. So all these relations will have to be dealt with in detail and changed completely.
Pondicherry, the Christians are not entitled any share in the property. They have been deemed to be Hindus, and I said women are not entitled any right to the property. Then what is the need of making an amendment?
Dealing with personal laws, and my experience has been, I've been interacting with a large number of Christian organizations. Despite some initial opposition to some of these changes in the past, Christian women have been taking the lead, and the church authorities have also been very actively cooperating in the process of change of a large number of those laws. In the last session, we passed the amendments to the Indian Divorce Act, and when the organizations appeared before the standing committee, they improved upon the suggestions which the government had made. And this is after several efforts after 1947 had failed to bring about those changes. Therefore, what I am suggesting is that these amendments can be approved, and all other suggestions which we come to them, we have a regular consultation process with the members of the community, and after we have consulted them, there is no problem in bringing a second tranche of amendments on a later date if we so consider it necessary.